I knew better than to expect anything. But this was something else entirely. My name's Audra Penley. I'm 30, single, work freelance design contracts out of a shoebox apartment in Portland. Most of my days are quiet. Most of my nights are quieter. I've been on my own since I was 19, though technically I still had a family back in Yakima. That word, family, feels foreign now. Like something people say when they're too scared to admit they were just raised with roommates who never liked them. I hadn't gone home for Christmas in 2 years. The last time I did, my dad, Silas Redgrave, looked me in the eye and said, "Didn't know you were still alive." That was his version of a warm welcome. But this year, he texted, not called, texted. "Be here 9 a.m., we're doing gifts early." That was it. No love, Dad. No emoji. Just a directive like I was an employee clocking into a shift I never signed up for. Still, I went. Because guilt wears 1,000 disguises and most of mine look like duty. The house hadn't changed. Same rusted wind chimes by the porch. Same cigarette smell embedded in the couch cushions. Nico, my younger brother by 2 years, was already there. Fresh haircut, new boots, that smug confidence he always wore like a tailored coat. He hugged Dad. They laughed about something I wasn't invited to hear. I handed over the bottle of wine I brought, mostly for show. No one acknowledged it. Instead, Silas clapped his hands and said, "All right, let's do this." We gathered in the living room. I sat on the far end of the couch next to a plastic tree that leaned slightly to the left. There were 3 boxes under it. 2 were wrapped in silver paper. One was small, plain white, no tag. I already knew that one was mine. Nico went first. His box was bigger. He peeled the paper like a game show contestant. Inside, a framed deed and a shiny key on a gold ring. "Audra," Dad said, not even looking at me. "I'm signing the house over to Nico. He's earned it." I didn't blink, didn't flinch, just nodded once and whispered, "Nice." Then Silas turned to me, eyes flat, voice dry. He tossed the white box into my lap like it weighed nothing. "Maybe in your next life, kid." That sentence hit harder than any slap. And it wasn't the words. It was how casually he said them. Like he genuinely believed I wasn't meant for more in this life. I opened the box slowly. There was nothing inside. Literally nothing. No card, no note, no joke. Just air. Silas stood up, already moving on. Nico was talking about renovation plans, knocking out walls, adding a man cave. I was still staring into an empty box. I wish I could say I cried. I didn't. Not right then. I just sat there, arms limp, stomach hollow, realizing this wasn't a one-time thing. It was the final confirmation of a truth I'd swallowed for years, that I was never the kid he wanted, just the one he tolerated. Nico leaned over, chuckling. "He thought about giving it to you, you know," he whispered. But then again, he said, she wouldn't know what to do with a house. And that's when something shifted. It wasn't rage, it was clarity. I stood up calmly, placed the box back under the tree, and said nothing. Not out of weakness, out of restraint, because I wasn't going to fight for a place I was never welcome. Not anymore. I said my goodbyes. No one asked me to stay. I walked to my car, fingers trembling, but not from cold. I started the engine, stared at my own reflection in the rearview mirror, and knew something had cracked open inside me. But not in a way that would break me. Number in a way that would wake me. Because what they didn't know was that Mom, before she died, had done something Silas had no clue about. And that little detail? It would change everything. I drove for 4 hours that night and barely remember a single mile. Just headlights, yellow lines, and that sentence playing on repeat in my head. "Maybe in your next life, kid." It wasn't even the worst thing Silas Redgrave had said to me, but somehow it cut the deepest. Maybe because I didn't flinch this time. Maybe because I knew I'd finally stopped hoping he'd be someone else. When I got back to Portland, I didn't cry. I cleaned my kitchen at 2 a.m. I scrubbed the counter until my knuckles bled. I wasn't trying to tidy up. I was trying to scrape him off me. The smell of his aftershave still lingered on my sweater. The box he gave me, empty, cruel, deliberate, sat untouched in the passenger seat. I didn't bring it inside. I hadn't slept in 36 hours when it hit me. A memory I hadn't thought about in years. I was maybe 8 or 9. I'd spent a whole week making a handmade Christmas ornament for Mom, painted it with little gold stars, spelled her name in glitter, even tied a ribbon bow on top. I gave it to her on Christmas morning, practically vibrating with pride. Before she could even open the box, Silas chuckled and said, "Well, look at that. Our little Picasso." Then he took the ornament and hung it on the back of the tree. Didn't even let her see it. She looked at me and smiled, like she was trying to erase the sting. But I remember. I remember everything. After she died, I spent most of my teenage years stepping into shoes that didn't fit. Cooking dinner, folding laundry, walking Nico home from school when Dad forgot. He always forgot. But he remembered when Nico got a B+ in math. He remembered every time Nico hit a ball or passed a driving test. Me? I won a statewide essay contest in 10th grade. He never read it. I stopped inviting him to things. Graduation, my first art show, even when I got published in a design journal last year. He didn't ask, so I didn't offer. But here's the twist I never saw coming. 2 days after I got back from Yakima, I was cleaning out an old keepsake box. One of those cheap wooden things with the fake leather trim that I hadn't opened since college. I was looking for an old Polaroid to cheer myself up. Instead, I found a manila envelope wedged in the bottom, sealed with clear tape. It was labeled in my mother's handwriting. Inside, a copy of her will. Not the version Dad had shown us years ago, the one where everything goes to Silas. This one was different. This one listed me as a co-owner of the house. She had signed it 6 months before she passed. Dated, notarized, all official. My name, Audra Penley, was right there next to Silas Redgrave on the deed. And this was never mentioned. Never acknowledged, never honored. He'd buried it, literally, stashed it away like it was junk mail. I sat on the floor, shaking, trying to connect the dots. The memory of Nico waving the house keys in my face felt like a fever dream now. He had no idea. None. And I knew in my gut Silas had forged something, anything to push that paperwork through. But he couldn't erase Mom's signature. She knew. She saw me. She tried. He just made sure her voice died with her. And that's when I decided I wasn't just walking away this time. I was walking toward something. By the time Friday rolled around, I'd barely slept. My head was spinning with dates, signatures, possibilities. I kept going back to the way Mom had taped that envelope shut like she knew it wasn't safe in that house. Like she was sending a message to future me. You have a right to exist. I stared at that will for hours. And then finally, I did something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. I drove back to Yakima. Not to talk. Not to make peace. I had a plan. Or at least the start of one. I told myself I was just going to get more answers. Nothing messy, nothing dramatic. But you can't walk into a burning building and expect not to smell like smoke. I showed up unannounced on a cold, gray morning. Nico was gone. His pickup wasn't in the driveway. Silas was inside, watching an old Western recliner kicked back like nothing in the world could bother him. He didn't even look surprised when I walked in. Just muttered, "Didn't think you had the guts to show your face again." I didn't answer. I smiled politely, the way I'd learned to do around people who mistake quiet for weakness. I told him I left my laptop charger upstairs. "Lieutenant?" He waved me off, eyes still glued to the screen. "Don't take anything else that isn't yours." That sentence almost made me laugh out loud. I climbed the stairs slowly, every step familiar and sickening. The carpet was still that ugly brown from the early 2000s, still stained with history. Once inside his office, I moved fast. I didn't have long. Silas never let anyone into that room growing up, called it his command post. The desk was locked, of course, but the top drawer was slightly ajar. That alone made my skin crawl. It was a mess inside. Receipts, loose keys, a bottle of pills with someone else's name on it. But tucked near the back, under a stack of folded bills, was a thin blue file folder. The name on the tab? House title, final transfer. My hands went cold. I opened it. There it was. The official document transferring full ownership of the house to Nico Redgrave. Effective 3 months ago. Signed by both parties. But then my heart stopped. Because one of those signatures was mine. Not a scanned copy. Not typed. A real pen signature. Except, I never signed it. I stared at the page like it might rearrange itself. My name was there. The loop in the P was almost right, but not quite. The slant of the Y in Penley curved the wrong way. Whoever faked it had done their homework. But I'd taken enough calligraphy classes in college to know how my signature was supposed to move. It wasn't just illegal. It was intentional. Cold. Calculated. Silas hadn't just written me out of the house. He'd forged my consent to do it. And then I saw it. On the very last page of the packet, in tiny fine print at the bottom of a photocopied check stub. Authorized withdrawal from joint estate account. Audra Penley. That's when I realized. It wasn't just the house. He'd been using my name on legal documents for years. My breath left my body in one shot. I sat there on that faded leather chair, file in hand, feeling like I was made of glass and someone had just thrown a rock through my chest. All those times he said I never contributed, never pulled my weight, never stepped up. He'd been using me to fund Nico's business, to pay property taxes, maybe even to secure loans. I didn't know how deep it went yet. But the ground beneath me wasn't just cracked. It had been hollowed out for years, and I'd been walking across it, thinking I was lucky it held. I heard footsteps downstairs, the creak of Silas's recliner. My time was up. I stuffed the folder into my coat and headed down, acting like I'd forgotten something unimportant. "Find what you were looking for?" he called out, eyes still on the TV. I smiled. "Not yet, but I'm getting close." I drove back to Portland with the folder strapped in the passenger seat like it might try to escape. I couldn't even listen to music. Every song felt like static. My mind was running so loud it didn't leave room for anything else. He signed my name. He used my name, and not just once. Over the next 2 days, I barely slept. I pulled every credit report, tax record, and banking document I could legally get my hands on. Some I had to fight through account recovery systems I hadn't touched in years. Others I had to beg for. But when the pieces started falling into place, it wasn't a puzzle. It was a fucking crime scene. Silas had used my name to open a joint estate trust 3 years after Mom died. That trust had quietly been funding Nico's company. Not just once. Consistently. Over $40,000 total. Loans, property taxes, even something labeled vendor entertainment, which I can only assume meant whiskey and steak dinners to charm clients. All under my social security number. The worst part? He never even tried to hide it. The documents weren't buried. They were sitting there in plain sight because he never thought I'd look. Because he assumed I'd stay small. Stay silent. Stay scared. But I wasn't scared. Not anymore. I called Nadia Becker, a friend from college who went to law school while I was working at a Target and eating ramen for breakfast. We hadn't talked in 2 years, but I didn't care. She answered on the second ring. "I need you to look at something," I said. 2 hours later, she was in my apartment, coffee in one hand, reading glasses in the other. I laid out everything on the kitchen table like we were playing a very depressing version of Monopoly. She read silently for 15 minutes. Then she looked up and said, "This is fraud, Audra." And it's not even subtle. I just nodded. I don't want revenge. I want leverage. Nadia raised an eyebrow. Same thing, if you do it right. Over the next 3 weeks, we worked in silence. No social media posts, no calls to family, just paperwork, filings, notarizations. I set up an LLC in my name, opened a shell corporation through a holding agent, secured the rights to the joint estate claim. And then I bought the mortgage. The one Silas took out against the house last year to help Nico scale the business. The one they thought was still being paid in small installments. I paid it off. Then I bought it again, under the shell company. On paper, everything looked normal. The mortgage was legally held by a third-party firm, but the fine print? That firm was me. I didn't need to repossess the house, not yet, because I had something better, and this is where it gets ugly. Nico had taken out a private line of credit tied to the house, not knowing it had technically been sold. 2 days before the final lien payment was due, I intercepted the notice. Not illegally, just cleverly. He missed the payment, and the penalty kicked in. The house was flagged for reassignment. I gave it 48 hours, then I mailed the certified letter. Not from me, from Audra Holdings, LLC. I heard nothing for 5 days. Then a voicemail came in from Silas. Short, breathing heavy. What the hell is this? I didn't call back, because the next morning I showed up at the front door of the Redgrave house in a charcoal coat and leather gloves, like I wasn't the same girl they left sitting on a couch with an empty box. Silas opened the door. He looked smaller somehow. Older. Behind him, Nico stood frozen. His mouth parted, but no sound came out. I handed over a plain envelope. Thought you might want to know who owns this place now, I said. Silas opened it, hands shaking. Inside was the final deed, and stapled behind it was a photo I found wedged in the back of Mom's keepsake box, one she'd hidden for a reason. It was Silas, and another woman, dated 2 months before Mom passed, holding hands, on a trip he told us was for a conference. I leaned in, just enough so only Silas could hear. You didn't just forge my name. You erased hers. He went pale. Silas didn't say a word. He just stood there on the porch, holding that envelope like it was burning through his fingers. His eyes were locked on the photo I'd tucked behind the deed. The one where he wasn't with my mother, but with someone else. Someone whose name I didn't need to know. I wasn't here to dig that part up, just to show him I could. Behind him, Nico looked from me to his father, then back again. He hadn't said a word either. And for the first time in my life, it was them who didn't know what to say. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just watched it all sink in. Silas had forged my signature, stolen my name, lied about Mom's wishes. And now? He was standing on a porch he didn't legally own, in a house that was no longer his, holding a picture that made the myth of our family collapse in his own hands. I let that moment sit. Heavy. Quiet. Then I stepped back and said, calm and even, you can stay through the weekend, but I want the keys by Monday. Both sets. He blinked. Don't push it, I added. I already gave you more grace than you gave me. I walked away. No screaming, no slamming doors, no threats. Just the sound of gravel crunching under my boots and the wind pulling at my coat like it was proud of me. 2 days later, the keys showed up in a padded envelope with no note. Nico texted me one line. I didn't know. I didn't answer. Maybe one day I'll believe that. When I stepped inside the house again, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like aftermath. Everything was still where they'd left it. Same kitchen chairs, same stained rug, same smell of old smoke and cheap aftershave. I stood in the middle of the living room and just let the silence wrap around me. It didn't feel like home. It never really did. But it was mine now. Not because they gave it to me, because I took back what was mine to begin with. I stayed one night, just to prove I could. I slept on the floor with an old blanket and a space heater humming like a lullaby. The next morning, I took one last look at the walls, then locked the door behind me. I put the house on the market the following week. Every penny from the sale went into a separate account. My name. My future. Sometimes people ask me if I regret it. If I wished I'd handled it more gently. If I feel guilty. Number I don't. Because silence isn't grace when it protects the wrong people. And forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting who buried you and called it parenting. What I learned, maybe too late, maybe just in time, is that some families survive on myth, and the only way to break free is to stop pretending it was ever real. If you've ever had to fight to prove you existed in your own family, if you've ever had to rebuild your name from the pieces someone else tried to erase, you're not alone. I'd love to hear your story in the comments if you're ready to share it. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, you can stick around. No pressure, no pitch. Just real people finally saying what should have been said a long time ago. Thanks for listening. Really.